Story 1. As a prosecutor, the few times I have seen them accept that reality is when they show up for their trial and realize they will have to represent themselves in front of a jury, which is very different from appearing only before a judge. Story 2. My neighbor realized it when the Federal Bureau of Investigation kicked his door in. I was glad to be home to see it happen. Story 3. I had a coworker at an old job who believed in this stuff. I'm not sure if he was actually a legitimate sovereign citizen or just a libertarian, anti-government type. He would watch YouTube videos of people being detained and talk about how no one had any contract with the government or the "I never asked to be born" mindset. He ended up having his car stolen. Even though he claimed the law did not apply to him, he evidently believed it applied to others because he filed a police report. A week or two later, they found his car abandoned, but he had not paid registration, and I think he also had outstanding parking tickets. The police would not release the car until he paid back fees and impound costs that would have exceeded the car's value. He tried to take his case to court, arguing he did not need registration and that he had not agreed to the terms of a parking ticket. But he lost the case, or at least he said he did. I do not know if he actually pursued it, but I always found it ironic that he relied on the law to recover his stolen car and to prosecute the thieves while insisting the law did not apply to him. I tried to point out this logical flaw, but he argued that the government has a duty to serve and protect because it has a contract with the public. He was a nice enough person but had odd views on power dynamics and social interactions, which I think isolated him and helped shape his extremist mindset. Story 4. What defines them as sovereign citizens is that they do not, in fact, realize the law applies to them. Story 5. A sovereign citizen uses the law to claim it does not apply to them, which means either their basis for that claim is invalid or the law does apply. Their position is not arrived at through logic. Therefore, logic cannot free them from their emotional short circuit. Story 6. Several people in Western Australia discovered there are serious consequences to being a sovereign citizen when they had their firearms licenses revoked. They had not committed any crimes yet, but the authorities argued that people who do not recognize the state or its laws cannot be considered law-abiding or fit and proper persons and therefore cannot hold a firearms license. To provide context, there have been 2 separate incidents of sovereign citizens killing police officers in recent years, one at Wiambilla in Queensland and another in Porepunkah in Victoria. The person alleged to be responsible for the Victoria shooting escaped and has not been found. Firearm murders are very rare in Australia, so these events were major news. There is significant concern about sovereign citizens and others, colloquially called cookers, having access to weapons. Cookers refers to people who have adopted extreme conspiracy theories or other severe misinformation, sometimes associated with serious drug use. Obvious but necessary disclaimer. I am not a sovereign citizen and I do not sympathize with their views. Story 7. I do not understand how someone can be so studied in all the alleged loopholes that grant them supposed sovereignty without reaching the conclusion that laws are rules enforced by violence. Countries have sovereignty not because they argue they should but because they can, at least in part, back up that claim with retaliation or the threat of force. Given that, as an individual, claiming sovereign citizenship to a government agent is like telling a mugger to stop because it is against the law. Sovereignty requires backing by money or overwhelming power, often both. Unless you are a billionaire or a mad scientist with a secret doomsday device, I cannot fathom how anyone arrives at that conclusion. Story 8. Probably when the vehicle window is smashed and the police do things to them against their sovereignty to aid their exit. Story 9. I've seen 2 sovereign citizen videos where learning occurs. In one, a man is handcuffed and placed in the back of a squad car and says, "I think I have been lied to," referring to sovereign citizen claims. The way he said it, you could tell he had a revelation that the law applies to him too. In the other, a woman films from her front porch as her sovereign citizen husband is arrested in the street. She narrates sarcastically, "Thanks, Moorish science. There goes my husband in handcuffs. Here comes the tow truck to take our car. Who is going to pay for that? Your guru? Moorish science. Give us $50 and you never pay taxes again?" It drips with sarcasm. It's great. Story 10. I did information technology work for a company that set people up as Panamanian companies. The idea was that you funneled your money through Panama, which uses the United States dollar to avoid paying taxes. I received a 1-week all-expenses-paid trip to Panama to set up their server. Everyone in the company went to federal prison. My guess is that was when reality hit. I had a great time in Panama, though. Story 11. I don't think any of them are here. If they were, I hope they would realize that everyone here thinks they are big dummies. After all, they are sovereign citizens. Story 12. One of my favorite things is watching court cameras that show sovereign citizens trying to avoid traffic tickets. Story 13. I saw videos of them. In Russia, we have similar people who think they are still citizens of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Companies sell fake Union of Soviet Socialist Republics passports to older people, who then go to police stations or refuse traffic citations, claiming they are above the law. They shout this until a judge reminds them they are in serious trouble and that the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the Russian Federation are the same country, so the same laws apply and they are legally liable. Story 14. Honestly, it wasn't dramatic. One day I received a fine I couldn't avoid, and I had to accept that the law applies to everyone. Story 15. Probably the same time they realized vaccines contain government trackers and dead kids at schools are just crisis actors. Story 16. You will receive exactly 0 first-person replies to this post, but second-hand stories from others will be interesting. Story 17. My first encounter with one was in court, waiting for my turn before the judge. A man in an electric wheelchair rolled in with 2 random flags, at least 15 feet high, on each side of his chair, a blow-up doll in his lap, and a camouflage helmet on. I asked my lawyer if he was trying to plead insanity. My lawyer had seen him at a previous court date. He had repeatedly refused to tell the judge his name, citing some belief that he did not have to. He believed or tried to convince others that his country was wherever his wheelchair was parked, that the flags were his nation's, and that the court needed to recognize it. The court had provided a public defender who was essentially answering simple questions for him, such as his name and address. If I remember correctly, it was over a fine of a few $100s. He was not facing jail time or any real trouble. It was bizarre. Story 18. I can only relate this story to the best of my ability. In the 1990s and 2000s, my parents made friends with a man who was a lawyer trying to sue the Internal Revenue Service and soliciting donations for his ministry to support his mission. My parents were essentially still libertarian when I was younger and believed that taxation was illegal and morally reprehensible. I agree on some level in some situations, but my parents really believed it was not their responsibility to pay for anything or anyone they did not wish to support. Not that they did not believe in taxes, just that they should be able to choose what their taxes would fund. That sounds appealing in theory, but whatever. At some point, he threatened an Internal Revenue Service agent and was given 15 years in prison. My parents also knew a few contributing members who received 1 to 2 years in prison. It was crazy. Story 19. I even sorted the comments by controversial, and I do not think there is a single actual sovereign citizen among them. They are all on Facebook, I think. Story 20. Even if they are restrained, arrested by police, brought before a judge who quotes the law to them verbatim and then jails them, they will still complain that their human rights have been violated or whatever other nonsense they think they can get away with. Rules are rules, people. I am as angry and disappointed as anyone when I get pulled over for speeding or whatever else. But I am not about to be thrown into the county jail by saying your rules do not apply to me or I did not agree to these laws you speak of. I pay my fine and take my lumps because I tend to have a lead foot. Story 21. I realized I was willing to use the full power of the state to compel one neighbor to help pay for the education and health care of another neighbor's children. Story 22. Can someone gaslight Trump into deporting sovereign citizens? They do not recognize themselves as citizens of the United States, so get them out. It would be so beautiful. Story 23. Mon père a été condamné pour inceste sur des enfants de moins de 15 ans dont il avait l'autorité. Il s'agissait de mes filles. Story 24. I am not a sovereign citizen, but I work in criminal courts. Once a sovereign citizen went to trial representing themselves. Of course they lost, and their first and last words were, "I'd like to get a lawyer." A little too late for that, my guy. Story 25. Most seem to have poverty-level incomes. How many wealthy sovereigns have you seen? I think this whole movement is made up of people who do not want to or cannot pay for the costs of the legal system today. I bet if sales taxes, insurance, and registration were free, there would not be as many sovereigns. Just my opinion. Story 26. They probably turned a simple traffic violation into multiple charges because the person was traveling, so that person, but not the individual, was hauled off to jail even though we were under maritime law. Story 27. Similar to less credible conspiracy theories, they believe they possess knowledge that makes them smarter or better than everyone else because they looked it up to reaffirm their belief and refused to accept contrary evidence. Story 28. When I read this post, I realized how similar sovereign citizens are to supporters of Make America Great Again. I'm not trying to be snide, but hearing them become convinced of something that is far from reality sounds similar. Story 29. When I was screaming at my mom in Ross, she grabbed my hand, spun me around, and spanked my bottom in front of everyone. Story 30. A common belief is that there are magical phrases one can put into a letter to a car company that would require the company to provide a new car for free. Story 31. I am not one, but judging by the videos online, the realization usually hits about 5 seconds after the car window gets smashed. Reality has a way of catching up pretty fast. Story 32. When she received an inheritance limited to $1,000 a month, the remainder was managed by a trust that was answerable only to a particular law firm. The arrangement cost 1/5 of his total wealth, but he did not trust her and preferred that she be placed in that arrangement rather than receive the money directly. He was white, came from a wealthy family, held a Master of Business Administration degree, and had actually won the lottery. Story 33. Sovereign citizens. When did you realize that you are a complete moron? Fixed that for you. Story 34. Am I being detained? I don't have to answer your questions, sir. Story 35. Never. If they realized the law applies to them, they would no longer be sovereign citizens. Story 36. I doubt that anyone delusional enough to think the sovereign citizen movement will work is self-aware enough to answer this question. Story 37. I was thinking that sovereign citizens are anarchists who believe the law should not apply to anyone who does not consent. I did not know they believe the system has been enacted and that they are part of it. Story 38. Honestly, the mindset behind some people is really simple. They treat the law like an algorithm, like computer code, and believe they have found an exploit. It is like the difference between playing an online role-playing game and playing a tabletop role-playing game with friends. If you find an exploit in the computer game, you can repeatedly crush opponents because the code allows it. But if you try that with friends, they will quickly agree it is against the rules. Those people do not understand that human laws are reinterpreted by the humans who make up the legal system. The law is not a machine. All that cleverness can be dismissed in an instant. They would be better suited to being computer hackers, not law hackers. Story 39. Who is responsible for starting that movement? There must be a YouTube creator who sparked it. Story 40. I miss when this subreddit wasn't all bait that no one replied to except Reddit comedians. Story 41. Whenever I hear someone say, "Not my president," I am reminded of sovereign citizens. Story 42. I would imagine when they realized that general cognitive thought did not work for them. Story 43. Nice try, but I don't listen to anyone, including me. Harold is a tiger that cannot be caged. Harold Homer. Story 44. As if a sovereign citizen could ever realize that their very own sobriquet is self-contradictory. Story 45. A friend of mine told me a story from his work as a lawyer. A man, let's call him Damon, went to a lot of effort to stalk and intimidate his ex-partner, the mother of his children. He created more hours of content on YouTube than I have spent playing Helldivers. In those videos he made various threats. When he was incarcerated, he continued to write letters to the corrections department, the opposing lawyer, and the judges, demanding exorbitant sums of money for his time in custody. Apparently, he also gave the corrections officers serious headaches. It must have been a significant issue for my friend to even mention it, which made him laugh. Finally, after about 2 years, 3 things happened quickly. First, His law firm sent him a blunt letter essentially saying that every letter he sent strengthened his ex's case, that he was wasting their time, and that he needed to submit a plea and bring the required funds. Second, Damon complied. He pleaded guilty because being a sovereign citizen does not exempt you from the law, and he had committed the acts alleged. Third, he was released on a suspended sentence. Funny how that works, isn't it? Story 46. They only believe in the laws of physics until gravity puts them in handcuffs. Story 47. Wesley Snipes did not believe that he had to pay taxes. How did that work out for him? Story 48. The question is an oxymoron because if they believe the law applies to them, they would not be sovereign citizens. Story 49. Brave of you to assume sovereign citizens could read your post. Story 50. I admit that, after some thought, it is strange that we are born into a place on earth without consent and forced to live in ways determined by others. We are never given a real choice to opt out. Just an interesting thought. Story 51. Do Donald Trump and others like him count as sovereign citizens? Story 52. Call immigration and customs enforcement and deport them to their sovereign nation. If they cannot tell you where it is, South Sudan or El Salvador will do. Story 53. 1. The term sovereign citizen is an exonym. What most people call sovereign citizens do not call themselves sovereign citizens. 2. Might makes right, so even if you are 100% in the right legally, you can beat the rap but you cannot beat the ride. Story 54. I know it applies to me, but I think it is unjust and hostile behavior by people who have no business telling me how to live. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.